Welcome to the webinar today. The topic is Trust in Crisis, Strategies for Rebuilding Trust in Teams and Organizations. We'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar. I'm Joe Folkman, and I'm excited to be here. And I'm joined by one of our greatest consultants and partners, Paul Leboffe. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experience with us.
Delighted to be here, Joe. Thanks.
And Jill Mancini is our chat host. And Jill, what instructions do you have for folks who are chatting online?
Thanks, Joe. I would say chat freely. I will respond as quickly as I can and try to get to you during the webinar. But if I get overrun by great comments, I do promise you that we will follow up.
Thanks so much, Jill. And let's start today. I want to talk about my Manhattan project. Now, this is always a little confusing to people because most people know that the Manhattan Project was where we built the atomic bomb. You might have seen the movie recently, and I wasn't trying to blow up the world, but I was trying to bring it back together. And the question that I had that brought me to this was, what was the smallest behavior with the largest impact? And so I looked through my database and I tried to kind of say, which one, kind of very small behavior really has the most significant impact? And the thing that I found was it was trust. Now, what's interesting about trust is you know who you trust and who you don't trust. And even at a young age, people understand trust. They know they can trust certain people and not trust others. And I mean, you could put an academic definition on it, but people know really early on about trust, and when they're young and when they're little, and they learn as they go about trust. But the significance of this impact, the data point, one data point we found was on the World Values Survey. They ask a question, and the question is, can most people be trusted, or do you have to be careful? And what we find from that is that if they look at the response of that in a country and correlate it with GDP, there's a 0.83 correlation, such that, in Norway, about over 80% of the people say, yes, most people can be trusted. But in Colombia, South America, only 10% say it can be trusted. And if you look at the GDP between those two countries, it's significantly different. So, Paul, what's your experience with trust, and have you seen it really helping and hurting businesses throughout your career?
So, Joe, when you talk about your Manhattan Project, what you remind me about is the best teams that I've worked with, they treat trust as a verb, right? I trust you until you lose my trust. The lower performing teams, they treat it like a noun. They treat it like a thing that you have to earn. You have to earn my trust. So what I see is trust and velocity go hand in hand. And I'm sure we'll talk about more about that later.
That's true. I love that analogy there. So as you think about trust, there's some research that suggests that it makes life predictable. I remember I went to the airport last June, and I was flying to New York, and I was in the lounge, and all of a sudden, there was a rumble in the lounge, and it turns out that every flight to the East Coast had been canceled. I'm like, whoa, and it's fascinating. In my years of consulting, I have never missed getting there. I mean, it's ugly sometimes, but I got there. But there was no way to get to my destination because it was a huge rainstorm. They canceled all flights everywhere, and life became unpredictable. And all of a sudden, my my trust went down significantly. It creates a sense of community. You know, do you trust your neighbors? Do they trust you? Do they let you know if something's up your house? Or do you live in a community where, you know, you don't know your neighbors? And that's very different. And it also makes it easier for people to work together. Paul, you've had some experience with those things too. Which one of these really rings a bell for you?
You know, Joe, this notion of predictability, especially post-COVID, all the clients I'm working with are wrestling with how to deal with, you know, FUD, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, this lack of predictability. And one of the things that I'm noticing is we have to operate differently in terms of trust, right? How do we build it remotely? How do we sustain it? How do we build it when there's more turnover? So that predictability piece seems to loom large.
It really does. And, you know, these are differences that we've never seen before. Now, Paul Zak, he's a neuroeconomist. See, I thought a psychometrician was confusing, but neuroeconomist takes the cake here. He studied the difference between high and low trust organizations. What I love about Paul Zak is he refers to trust as friction, you know, and I really think it makes sense because when there's low trust, there's friction, and you know, things don't go smoothly, they don't move along, they get stuck. But he tried, you know, in high trust organizations, 40% less turnover, 66% closeness with colleagues, 106% more energy, 70% more alignment with goals and purposes, 17%, this is my favorite, higher compensation. Which one of those stand out for you, Paul, as an interesting metric there?
You know, Joe, it's what you noted at the top. It's that 106% more energy. Because again, what I see in teams over and over is they have what I call a high coefficient of drag. You know, it feels like they're driving with the brake on. And often what I see is teams come in one of two flavors. It's either star player or weakest link. And most of the organizations I work with have a weakest link team. And what happens is if one person's dragging down the system because of trust, the energy in the team significantly lower, and therefore the output's lower.
Yeah, I love that phrase, being all in. And, you know, trust is the key to that. And that's that energy, that part that people give more effort and energy when they're trusted. So we were wondering about you because we're going to show you a new product today. We're going to show you about a team trust assessment and kind of give you an overview of what that is and how it works. But to start off with, what we'd like to do is learn about what's the level of trust in your team. So, you know, are you confident that you have a high trust team? You work in a moderate trust team, low trust team, or I'm not sure what the level of trust is on my team. I know this is kind of a hard question, but we'd love to sort of see where you are in terms of when you think about your team, however you define that, where would you say you are in terms of the level of trust? Paul, what do you think is going to come out on this survey?
Yeah, it's either 2 or 4, but this reminds me what I see in a lot of organizations. Again, it's what I would call pockets of trust.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, trust doesn't average out, right? And I'm thinking of one example in particular in a public company where I was working with the COO who was supposed to be the heir apparent to be the CEO. And he didn't become the CEO because what the organization saw is he had his guys. And what happened is he created pockets of trust in the organization, which also created pockets of distrust. So that idea of being, you know, moderate trust, some good, some not, it's common, but it doesn't seem to work too well.
Well, let's see what folks said. Here they are. Well, you were right. I work in a moderate trust team, about 49% of the people. It's great. At 32%, I'm confident I have a high trust team, and about 8% aren't sure. Well, we're going to give you some ideas and some insights on how you can measure trust in your team and what to do with that data, and well, really how trust works in a team. Now, we've used this team trust assessment recently in a large retail organization. We actually had 300 people respond to the assessment, and those 300 people were part of about 39 different locations, stores, if you will. And one of the variables we looked at, and Paul, you know, sometimes data makes me drool just a little bit, but this really did, because I found a correlation between the level of trust in stores and turnover. And what we found is we divided the trust score into quartiles. If stores were in the bottom quartile, they had about 87% turnover. The next quartile up, 76% turnover. But the top two quartiles was 67% turnover. Now, when you look at this, if you're not in retail, 67 seems like a high number. But in their experience, that was a pretty good number, because there's lots of churn in retail. But that's an interesting graph to look at the correlation. Well, what do you think? Why is it that low trust leads to turnover? What's your theory on that?
So, you know, I was thinking about this when I looked at the graph. In today's world, DEI is very important, right? It's becoming increasingly important for people working in organizations. And DEI has now been expanded to DEIB, this notion of belonging. And I think it's reflected here. When somebody feels like they really belong to an organization, they're more likely to stay in that organization. And they feel like they belong if they're trusted. If they're not, they're more likely to leave. And to me, the cost to organizations is extraordinary, because there's not only the retraining and all that, but trust can be really fragile. So as soon as you add one person to a new team, it impacts the chemistry of the entire team, and the trust building process starts over and over. So I understand why people would leave if they don't feel like they belong, but there's a significant trust to the organizations.
Yeah, that's that churn that organizations go through. And then the second thing I looked at was engagement. And as you know, we measured engagement with these 5 engagement questions. And, you know, we find that engagement is correlated to lots of outcomes, but it really measures, you know, how much people like working in the organization, their willingness to give more effort, their satisfaction with the organization, confidence that they'll be successful. But the range here, the bottom quartile, 29th percentile, up to the top quartile at the 66th percentile. So engagement was lower. And the final thing was discretionary effort, which I think it's the magic. It's the magic in organizations, the willingness of people to work harder, to go further, to do more. And, you know, low trust organizations only have 20% of their employees willing to put, you know, in extra time and work harder. High trust organizations had 61%. Boy, that makes a difference when you know, and as you think about that, it's like, who can stay late? And in a low trust organization, it's like, okay, we're going to just have to force you to, right? So it really makes a difference. Any reaction on that, Paul?
So yeah, and in fact, I'm thinking about an organization, a pharmaceutical company I work with, and in their culture, they were trying to encourage people to speak up. So there's this notion of empowerment, right? And I think empowerment and engagement and discretionary effort are all kind of kissing cousins. So what was interesting is they said, be creative, speak up, try things. And then if it didn't work, they brought in the Spanish Inquisition. And what ended up happening is discretionary effort and engagement tapered off, because while they were encouraging people to be creative and to be empowered, they weren't supporting it in their culture. And I agree with you. This is the gold dust in an organization. Can you get people to go above and beyond?
The gold dust, I love that. So as you think about how to have a team where there's lots of trust, hang posters on the walls, only share positive news, never share bad news, encourage executives to smile more. Well, that doesn't work. So what does work? And again, in our experience, there's three elements. We found this with the individuals, and it's very similar with the teams, with one slight adjustment. We'll tell you about the slight adjustment in a minute. But the first element that we find that's really critical are relationships. And as we have this team assessment, what we're doing here is showing you the 5 items that we measure relationships with on the assessment. So members are quick to praise and slow to criticize. Team members are appreciated when they give extra effort. They get conflicts out on the table and resolved. Attempts to work collaboratively responded to positively, and team members support each other in improving their skills to perform their job. Relationships in a team are so critical. And I guess, if you've ever worked in a team where the relationships are bad, it's terrible. It's like torture. I don't know. Have you ever had that experience, Paul?
Yeah, and Joe, the one that jumps off the page at me here is team members get conflict out on the table, because the best teams I work with need this ability to do what I call rupture and repair. If they don't have that ability, it really undermines trust. And I've seen more than one team where somebody does something, and usually unintentionally, they hit a tripwire, it undermines trust, and then it gets very difficult to rebuild it.
Yeah, the quotient that many teams measure is what's said after the meeting ends, when people are the meeting ends and then people are like, they're grumbling after because nobody's going to say it in the team. And, it just really hurts things. So relationships are critical to trust. And if you have bad relationships, you have low trust. The second element that we think is important is expertise. Now, in the team environment, we added execution. So it's about knowledge and having the right knowledge and experience, but it's also about getting things done and making things happen and accomplishing the work that needs to be done. So the items that we measure, expertise and execution, team does everything possible to achieve objectives. Each team member is held accountable. Problems are resolved quickly and don't need to become a crisis. Individual performance problems are effectively addressed, and our team is effective at making the tough calls. And I love that individual performance problems when there's some person that isn't contributing and we just let them go, and that's just the way that just destroys trust in a team. That's terrible. You've had some experience with these too, Paul.
Yeah, probably. It's in fact, Joe, you just reminded me. I think there's a saying: "No CEO has ever fired someone too soon." And I can think of 2 examples right off the top of my head. One was with a legal team where somebody simply wasn't fitting into the team, and it just undermined the morale of the team. And it's not that this person wasn't a good lawyer; they just weren't trusted by their peers. And it really impacted the team, and the leader wouldn't let go of this person because they were a high performer. But the cost of holding on to that person, they almost had other people leave the team. It was that bad.
So the next element is the third one, and it's consistency, the extent to which team members are aligning their actions and their words with the commitments, acting with integrity. So the items: unethical behaviors not tolerated, team members insist on honesty, dealing with each other, team members are confident if they bring an ethical issue forward, it'll be addressed. In this team, people are valued regardless of the background, age, race, gender. When problems occur in this team, responsibility is accepted rather than looking for someone to blame. I love it when teams play the blame game. And it's like, okay, who do we blame? Consistency is critical. And inconsistency just destroys trust. We know that. Boy, we've seen that in so many organizations that where they rupture because of inconsistency. Paul, you've seen that probably also.
Yeah, in fact, this strikes two things. One is this one is very primal, this consistency notion, because our brains are effectively wired to protect us and to predict the future. And when either one of those things is threatened, it really undermines trust. And I'm thinking of an example here where, in leadership, they say you get what you walk by. And one of the leaders I was working with was doing a town hall, and he just said something that was off color. It just wasn't appropriate for the setting. And to her credit, one of his colleagues talked to him offline and had the courage to confront that, to make sure that he was maintaining the high standards and values of the organization. And that leads to consistency.
Oh, it does. It does. And, it's easy for people to get off kilter there. So those are the three trifecta elements of trust in a team. And as you think about these perfect three, now, for those of you that have seen the trifecta of trust at the individual level, you notice here that the numbers are slightly different. We find in the team environment, we have to kind of be a little better, and the low bars are a little lower. But what we find is if relationships are at or above the 75th percentile, expertise and execution at or above the 75th, and consistency, trust is at the 89th percentile. But if you miss on those three, trust is at the 11th percentile. And what's interesting here, and this is kind of one of the differences, in our Zinger-Folkman philosophy, we talk a lot about building strengths. We think that's important. It's important here too. But when we think about taking action, oftentimes when you think about this threesome here, you need all three. You need to really have a high level of trust. Now, you don't have to be at the 90th percentile, but you need all three to be working for you. And there's problems when you only have one. And so as you think about these three elements, there's this interaction effect between the three of them that really make trust work. Paul, do you think that's confusing to folks, or what else would you say?
No, I think what you're touching on, Joe, which I think is spot on. Trust is a compound skill, right? And we trust people holistically. And if you think about it, there has to be consistency, intellectual level, right? Do you have credibility? Behavioral level, are you consistent? The relational level, do I know you? Right? I know you and I talked the other day. I see this phenomenon, the Zenger-Folkman 360s, I call to know me is to love me. That when people are known by their raters, they tend to get a halo effect in that. And then there's always this question of intention, right? Do you have my back? So it really is a holistic approach, and these three dimensions really capture it.
Well, and let me show you what happens when we use these elements and we don't have all three. So if all three are below the 25th percentile, trust is at the 11th percentile. Now, look at the effect if two of the three are below. Well, now trust is a little better because, one's okay, but two are bad. If one is below, you're at the 32nd percentile. So, there's no, it's like we talk about a fatal flaw with our extraordinary leader assessment, and we measure that at the 10th percentile. The fatal flaw occurs here at the 25th percentile. Any one of those that below the 25th percentile is just devastating. It really negatively affects. But let's say you're at or above the 75th percentile on just one. Trust goes to the 65th percentile. Now that's pretty good, but it's not the 90th percentile. So if you're above on two, it goes to the 78th percentile. And if you're above on all three, trust is at the 89th percentile. Now, again, when we say above, we're saying 75th percentile. So you don't have to be perfect at these things, but if you're pretty good on all three of those, as you think about that, and as we think about teams going through this, I guess there's a couple of watch-outs. What's the thing that people need to pay attention to as they look at these results, Paul?
So, as I'm looking at the data, I'm actually thinking back to the poll we did at the beginning. And there were some people that said, I know I work in a high trust environment. And what occurred to me is trust is fragile. It's kind of like a success, right? Success is not a destination. It's a lifestyle, like it's ongoing. And I see the same thing with trust is we constantly need to make sure that we're maintaining the level of trust because it can be very easy to lose it.
Yeah, and what the assessment gives you is a metric to sort of know what's off. So let's just check in. What's your guess in your team? Which of these would have the biggest impact? Which of these do you think your team might need to work on to improve? Is it relationships? Is it expertise and execution, or is it consistency? So what's your guess on which one of these is going to make a difference for your team? Paul, any prediction here?
Yeah, well, it's funny. I was going to make a prediction, but this reminds me of an architectural firm that I was working with. That at the end of an offsite, the CHRO stood in front of the room and it says, "What's one thing you would like from your team?" And almost half the team, 16 people there, 8 of them said, "Trust me." And what occurred to me in that moment was, you can't just ask for trust, right? You need to have the building blocks of trust, and these are the 3 building blocks of trust. And I think they're, to your point earlier, they're all important. And at any given time, I think a team needs one or the other. Like it's almost like juggling plates, right? It's not static, it's dynamic.
Well, let's see what people said here. And relationships, 39%. That's all. There's always something you can do to improve relationships. But boy, look how close these are. Expertise and execution, 30%. If you're not hitting targets, if you're not, I mean, it's like, okay, we're in trouble. And then consistency, it's hard. It is hard to be consistent and to have that, going on. All right. So what I want to do is kind of walk you through what a team trust assessment is, how it works, what the report looks like. We're going to walk through this pretty quickly. So here's the assessment. Now, the assessment is 23 items. The extraordinary leader assessment is 60. So that's a, kind of a third of that. So it's pretty short. It's 23 items. The scale is an agree-disagree scale. So it's slightly different than, but as we're showing you 8 items here, and you can see the items that measure trust. There's 3 items that measure trust, and then the 5 items that measure expertise and execution. It takes people about 15 minutes to do this. And what you want to do is have every team member complete an assessment. And so asking every team member to do that really gives you a good view. Now, what you can do is you can also ask stakeholders. They're not team members, but there might be, they're close to the team. They know what's going on in the team. You can have stakeholders also weigh in. And you can separate the manager's ratings from the team member ratings, or you can put them together. So we provide both of those to you. Basically, the session that we designed where people get the results from the assessment, the session objective is to explore the dynamics of trust within your team and develop a plan for improvement of trust by the members. So this is a team event. The team reviews the report. And it's interesting because everybody has a share in what goes on and how they can improve trust. The feedback report basically looks like this. Here's the cover of the report. And then we show these 4 elements. We, of course, show the level of trust. You can see in this team, it's fairly high. And it's really bolstered up by the relationships, which is above the 75th percentile, and consistency, which just slightly below the 75th percentile. But the problem area, as you can see here, is around expertise and execution. It's down around the 25th percentile. So that's kind of a problem area. And that's, you can see that the color of the bars really represent the effectiveness of the team members. So it's easy to read this and get a scale. And so instantly you kind of know how your team is doing. We also show you the highest scored items, and you could read through those. And we have one report that breaks the team members and the team leader out as separate responses. And then we have a second report that puts them together, so the team leader's scores aren't revealed there. But you can see the trust and consistency and relationships are all positive here. And then comments. What circumstances or events in the team lead to greater trust among team members? And again, the comments are listed. We then ask people to indicate the importance of the 3 elements. Now, you can vote for one of the 3, okay? So the question is, we ask team members, which element, is done effectively by team members, would increase the team's overall level of trust? And the numbers over here show you the number of people that rated relationships number 1. They said that was the most important. And you only get to vote for one thing. 3 of the team members said it was expertise and execution. And then consistency, 2 of them. Now, the graph over here represents the effectiveness score. So as you know, the effectiveness on relationships was above the 75th percentile, on consistency just slightly below it, but the execution was low. And so that's probably where this team's going to focus on, because they're not doing that very well. You can see some of all these the most negative items were around expertise and execution. And again, here's the detractors to trust, the comments, and then we give the details from every item in the survey. So that's basically what the survey looks like. As a team would get a survey, the idea would be to identify one of the issues to work on, and then develop a plan for improving. This is always a helpful thing to do. And I have to say, we've done this at Zinger Folkman in our leadership management team. The first time was kind of surprising. It wasn't all great news, but the second time showed great improvement. So I'm excited about that. Now, Paul, as you know, one of the things we do is we have this idea of strength builders. Again, the idea of improvement here, there's a team development goal where a team's going to work on a specific thing as a team. But also what we encourage people to do is have each team member to work on one thing that they can work on. And again, it's the strength builders that help you do that. As you think about these strength builders for improving relationships, which is an easy thing to do, you get, well, I'll just be nicer. What these give you is some really good insights on some specific actions teams can take to improve relationships with each other, starting with collaboration and cooperation, developing others, inspiring, asking for feedback, listening, and recognizing others. All are things that specific actions you can take to improve relationships. Paul, you've used this research a lot. What are some of the insights you've got out of strength builders and how they work?
So one of the things I like about what you just said a moment ago, Joe, is this idea of having the team goal, because to me, one of the fastest ways I've seen teams build trust is to turn the guns outside the boat. right? This idea of give them a goal to focus on. And it's remarkable how a team will come together, collaborate and cooperate, whatnot, when they have a shared or common goal to go after. And in order to become more effective in that, to me, the holy grail here is around feedback. It's the most effective way I've seen teams get better. And in fact, the best teams I've worked with, what they do is they agree on a feedback method that works for them and a feedback approach. And then they hold each other accountable to using it. And once you build that muscle, it just becomes the way we do work. And those are the teams that I find grow the fastest.
You know, only a few people said that they don't know the level of trust in their team, but I would say that 99% of us will be surprised. It's either better than we thought, you know, kind of we were the, you know, kind of the negative person, or it's not as good as we think it is, you know, and this is a way to really get a really good measure and a sense about how you're doing in trust in a team. And of course, along with the strength builders, there's a development guide. We go through each one of the trifecta elements. We give specific suggestions for improvement where individuals and teams can create that development plan. And what we'd like to end up with in this exercise is have that team identify the one element that's going to help them the most, create a development plan, and then have the team as a whole, but every member walk away with something they can specifically do to improve trust in the team. And again, what we know about trust is it's the bedrock of success in a team. It's the invisible force that transforms a group of individuals into a cohesive unit capable of achieving extraordinary results together. Teams are great and they can make a big difference. So that's our webinar for today. So Jill, are you going to talk to us about a special offer that we have?
Well, let me begin by thanking you for all your interesting comments and being quite engaged during this. And we would look forward to an opportunity to explore with you how we might pilot this in your organization and what configuration of solutions would really help you help your organization increase trust. So if you would like to continue the conversation, please let us know during the exit survey. And during the exit survey, if you complete that, and Joe, if you go on to the next slide, and please look in your chat for the link to the survey, we will be giving away 5 copies of Joe's book, The Trifecta of Trust. So we very much look forward to your feedback, to following up with you if you would like to continue talking about trust and building it in your organization. And we hope you win a book. So thank you very much for your time and your participation today. And Paul and Joe, thank you for sharing such great insights.